Hi, I'm Abdullah, and I'm going to be talking to you about distributed interaction design. The reason I'm making this video is because of the current climate with the whole coronavirus and people's inability to run user studies in labs and things like that. But this is work that I've been doing for a couple of years now in my PhD work. And there are many reasons why you would want to sort of reach out from your lab and reach for participants. For example, if you want to reach people who are geographically far away from you, or people with certain disabilities that prevent them from coming into the lab, or who when you have scheduling conflicts and things like that. So here's a little bit of an overview about what I'm going to be talking to you about. I'm going to go through some definitions and then walk you through the process of distributed interaction design, or D.X.D process, of how to go about designing interactions and then how to evaluate them. And finally, I will leave you with a little bit of with a little thought of how you might be able to apply the processes that I'm showing you to other participatory design tasks. So, as far as definitions go, if you think of a technology as an artifact that augments our ability to aid us in accomplishing some kind of a task, in these words, an interaction would be an interaction between a human and a technology would be that of three components: a human action, a technology function, and a feedback. To illustrate that further, say there is a person and a technology and they're interacting with each other. The interaction would go something like this. A user or the human would give some kind of input action, and in response, the system would perform some kind of a function, and then the system would give a feedback to the user to let them know that this function has been completed. So examples of what an input by a person could be: it could be either typing a command term, pressing a button, turning a knob, giving a voice command, touching a conductive surface, doing a mid-air gesture, tilting a device with a gyroscope in it, or closing a device like, I don't know, Motorola Razr Flip or something like that. Of course, these are just a few examples. There are many other ways of us inputting interactions to our system. And the system's way of communicating back to us could be either visual, auditory, haptic, or the last two. I've kind of gotten carried away with it. So the methodology at the center of what I'm going to be talking to you about is called the end user elicitation study, which is the method that I built the entire distributed interaction design on. The way this works is by having an end user participant in a design study, and you would show them a prompt of a system function as presented by some kind of feedback. So a visual or auditory representation of an event happening on the interactive system, and then you would ask your users to propose what kind of input action they would do to make that function happen. And then after you elicit many proposals from many users and you start looking at them, you start seeing themes emerging, and then the input action with the highest consensus from your participants would be sort of the preferred design to implement in your system. So in the distributed interaction design process that I've put together, there are 6 steps to designing and evaluating interactions outside the lab. The first one starts by you establishing a list of functions for an interactive system. So in other words, the technology that you're making, what things does it perform? Then you would elicit interaction proposals from end users. Then you would analyze those results to create sets of user-generated interactions. And then you would test the suitability of your interactions that you got from your end users. After that, you would repeat steps 2 through 4 if there are interactions that are not very easily identifiable for given functions. And finally, you can proceed by either having your end results if you're working in the academic context, or building your system if you're actually going about building a product, and thus completing the 6-step D.X.D process. To do this, in my work, I have created a tool which is called the CRUD Design Engine, but this tool is a highly functioning research probe, so it's not a commercially available tool that anybody can use. I will talk more about the availability of this tool later on in this video. So how does this work? I'm going to dive deeper right now into the process and how it would work and how you can do it yourself for your own project. So in the first step, you would establish a list of functions for an interactive system. So for example, say I have a TV-based web browser, and it performs the functions of any web browser, like refreshing a page, going back, going forward, going to a specific URL, or so on. And the way I want to interact with it, this new web browser that I'm building on a TV, is by either accepting mid-air gestural input or a voice command. So I would start by creating a study here. So this is a screenshot from the tool that I made, but essentially you can do that with any maybe survey tool if you want. You'd start by giving your study a title, so it's called Web on the Wall. It's based on a published study from 2012 by Morris. You can put in study instructions here in HTML, so you can include actually videos or images, and I'll show you that later. And also you can add a URL to a survey to collect like demographic information, sort of an exit survey for your participants. Then you would add a prompt. So a prompt would be like a prompt is how you would present your function to your participants. So here I'm sticking with text. So in my prompt, it would be here, how would you instruct your browser to go back? So essentially I'm trying to elicit input actions to trigger the go back function. And to do that, and the kind of actions that I'm trying to get are either voice transcription or a video. And the video would be of a person doing some mid-air gesture. You can see here under proposal production, I set it to open-ended. So I want my participants to come up with as many ideas as possible. I can, of course, limit them to a certain number, say like, I want each person to propose 3 proposals for each function. And I can ask them some rating questions about the proposal that they will give me, like how easy do they think it would be to perform this input that they're proposing, or how good of a match it is to the function that I'm prompting them with. And after that, I can hit the system that I created would create a custom web page, which has its own unique URL, which then takes us to the second step of the D.X.D process, which is eliciting interaction proposals from end users. And to do that, you would take that URL the system creates and send it to whoever you want to participate in your study. So it could be, publishing it on social media. You can reach out to individual participants via listservs, or using a recruiting platform like Amazon's Mechanical Turk. So this is the example that I'm going with from a study that I published last year. So when a participant gets the URL that we sent them, this is the instruction page that they get, which we set up for them earlier. And we can see here that the title is Web on the Wall. And then these are the study instructions that we put in. Make sure to add in your contact information, IRB approval number. Tell your participants how long do you think this study is. So I typically pilot my study with a couple of people that I know in person, or send them to a couple colleagues and say, do this study for me. How long does it take you? And let me know, so I would know how much to tell the participants it's going to take and compensate them accordingly. Then this is really important, is to do a good setup for your participants and put them in sort of the headspace to know what kind of device they're going to be interacting with, even though they're not actually going to be interacting with any device. But using this kind of phrasing that I'm showing you have shown that you can get good results and good interaction proposals that are comparable to an in-lab study. So in my setup here, I say, imagine your TV unit has the capability to recognize free-form gestures and voice commands to control its web browser. You will be presented with 15 prompts, each representing a browsing action, for example, refresh a page. For each prompt, we ask you to propose one or more interactions, like a gesture or a voice command, to trigger the prompt. You should propose interactions which feel most natural, easy to perform, and memorable to trigger for each prompt you're presented with. Then explain to them how they would go about finishing or completing these tasks. So here I say to propose a gesture, stand in front of your computer's webcam and perform the best gesture you think will trigger the prompt. And to propose a voice command, input a text transcription of the best voice command you think will trigger the prompt. Once you finish proposing interactions for all 15 prompts, in this case, in this study, we have 15 prompts, of 15 different functions that the web browser would do, hit the I'm done, and then you'll see a completion code that you need to save, and then they will see a link to the short exit survey that we use to collect demographics and technology use habits that we needed for that specific study that is referenced here at the bottom of the screen, and thank them for their participation. Then when they hit start, they see a list of a bunch of different, of like 15 different functions. When they click on one, so for example here, we see this is the interface that they're presented with, which reads, imagine you're interacting with a TV web browser which accepts mid-air gestures and voice commands. How would you instruct your TV browser to open a new tab? So that's the function is opening a new tab. So when they hit next, we ask them, what kind of interaction do you think would fit this task best? So in this case, they said it's a voice command, and here they would put in the voice command. So in this example, I am shouting at my TV browser, and after I hit next, I am asked to rate how easy this command that I just gave is to perform. So I think it's pretty easy to yell browser. I give it a 7. I highly agree. And I think it's a decent match by giving it a 5. And then if I want to if I have another idea, for example, this one is for a gesture, I can propose another propose another action, and this time it is a gesture. I see a feed from my webcam, and I record this dumb gesture because that's how I think I can bring up a web browser on a TV. Hit next. Again, it's not the easiest thing to perform, so I give it a 3, and it's not a really good fit, so I give it a 1. And that concludes sort of the what the user does and what the participant does. And so if we go back and wear our researcher hat, we would analyze these results to create sets of user-generated interactions. And to go about that, this is an example of the results we got. So for the open new tab, we see we got these 3 different examples. I'm cutting off the screen here because to protect the anonymity of the participants here. But we got essentially 3 different voice commands. One is open a new tab, and open a blank tab. And we would analyze it by putting proposal 1 and 2, open a new tab and new tab, to group them in the same group because they are the most similar, and open a blank tab is sort of not very similar to them. And from here, we see that the function with the highest consensus, or with the majority of participants agreed on, is actually new tab. So for the function of opening a new tab, we would say using the voice command new tab to trigger this function. At the end of the day, we end up with, for our list of functions, we end up with a list of user-generated actions that are sort of inspired by our users, or composed by our users, that the majority of them agree on. And to see whether or not these interactions that we ended up with are good or not, we would test the suitability of them in an identification study. An identification study, as I formulated it in this paper mentioned at the bottom of the screen, it's sort of the reverse of an elicitation study. So we're reversing what we just did by presenting our participants with an action performed by a person. So we show them like a gesture or a voice command and ask them, what do you think the computer or the interactive system would do? So what kind of function it would do in response to this input, and what kind of feedback it would give you. So again, to sort of validate the results of my web on the wall study, I did an identification study where again I set up another study in the same manner, but in here in the instructions I said, imagine your TV unit has the capability to recognize freeform gestures and voice commands to control its web browser. You will be presented with 49 interactions. For each interaction, provide us with one function you think your TV web browser will perform. Example, go back to the previous page, or so on, and try to propose the function that best fits the interaction shown, whether it's a gesture or a voice command. So we had a total of like 49 different interactions, and then we wanted to see, given this interaction, what action do our participants think it will be triggered. So to make this more clear, this is an example of one of those prompts of an interaction that we have. So what web browser function would be triggered by performing this voice command, refresh page. So essentially we're saying, if you say refresh page to your TV that has a web browser, what would the TV do? And unsurprisingly, people said it would refresh the page I'm currently on, or the page, the browser page would be refreshed, which means that the function with the highest consensus that we got from our participants was refresh. And once we get the functions for each input action that we have, we sort of try to match it to the original function that we had elicited those interactions for. So if it matches, then that means this interaction that we got from our users is easily identifiable by a new set of users, and it would be a good match. But if it doesn't, that's when we move on to step 5 of the D.X.D process, which is repeat steps 2 through 4 as necessary. So we would, for the interactions, for the input actions that didn't test so well, we would elicit new proposals from a new set of users, and then we analyze them again by creating a new set of user-generated interactions with the highest consensus, and then do another identification study to see if the new interactions that we got, the new input actions that we got, are easily identifiable or not. And we do that as many times as possible until we are satisfied with the actions that we got. And then from there on, we move to building the system, or publishing the paper, or whatever you want to do with those interactions that you got from actual end users. Now, if you want to move from just eliciting interactions to doing other kinds of participatory design or co-designing, if you can formulate your problem in the form of given a prompt and receiving a proposal, whether it's in text form, an image, an audio, or a video, you can essentially do this same process to fit whatever problem you're working on. And you can either do it in an unsupervised distributed manner, so you kind of treat it like a survey, or you can do it in a supervised manner where you would use a tool like this tool that I was showing you, just to collect the data and guide participants through the process of the study while you're talking to them and guiding them through it, either using Skype or Zoom or whatever video conferencing tool you want to use. Again, if you want to look at the papers that I've published around this or how the process works, it's all documented on the crowddesignengine.com. If you want access to the actual tool, you can email me, abdallah@axali.me, and I will try to get you some access to that would suit your needs. But if you think that your problem that you're working on is easily solvable using a surveying tool like Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, you can go ahead and do that. Thank you so much for listening.